So Amnesty International is saying that, remember when Putin was saying he's kidnapping kids?
Yeah, was he kidnapping their human shields? Is that what this is? That's because I wondered why the Russian-speaking kids in the war zone, they would call, like, why Ukraine want to keep the children of their enemies there.
Right. So Amnesty International admits Ukraine is using children as human shields.
Well, you just made the Roger Waters death list, Amnesty International.
The Ukrainians are committing war crimes against their own people, Amnesty International has revealed. Now, this is an article from March 22nd, 2023 by Frankie Stokes, right? Hey, Frankie. And it opens with, Ukrainian forces have put civilians in harm's way by establishing bases and operating weapon systems in populated residential areas, including in schools and in hospitals, as they repelled the Russian invasion that began in February. Now, that was from August 2022. Didn't make the news, though, did it? It's from this. This is from, I cut it off. I put it up too high.
Didn't we cover this back then?
Did we cover this?
Yeah, I remember, because they were saying all this stuff about Amnesty International. Ukraine.
I don't remember. See, the reason why I wanted to cover this,
I thought we did, and we had to think about how angry Ukraine was. Amnesty International said that
they were. In fact, their representative to Amnesty International resigned.
Right.
So the reason why I'm covering this is because a friend of mine got a text. They made a hit video out of me, and I was talking about Putin taking those Russian-speaking kids out of the Donbass so they don't become human shields,
right?
Or wherever he was taking them from, and so they don't get blown up.
But these are the pro. Like, even if somebody's like, "Oh, Jimmy, this is a lie and propaganda," they're from Donbass. Even though they don't say it, they try to like not say it, but it does pop up. They're from Donbass, so those are the people who don't want to be born in Ukraine.
Right? Why
would Ukraine care about? They're the ones they're shelling the whole time.
They're trying to kill them.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine got a text from one of his shitlib friends saying that his friend, your friend, they put a video up of me talking about that.
Oh, yeah, right.
And they're like, oh, Jimmy Dore siding with Putin. Can you believe people still talk like that, Kurt?
People still like Rachel Maddow.
Even after Iraq, people, oh, what are you, a Saddam Hussein apologist?
There's no connection.
They keep doing that. No matter what war we're in, you can't go against what the government says, or they say you're a traitor to our country.
Well, if you were a patriot instead of a putriot,
yeah, right,
you would have forgotten all the history up to and before Trump was elected, and then you reset, and then you forget, like, right when they invaded Ukraine. And COVID, forget about altogether. Like, we need to look forward.
So this was from August 4th, 2022. Ukrainian fighting tactics endanger civilians. Military bases set up in residential areas, including schools and hospitals. Attacks launched from populated civilian areas, and such violations in no way justify. So that's their. So I want to just show you something. Well, we already covered it. So there was documented a pattern of Ukrainian forces putting civilians at risk and violating the laws of war when they operate in populated areas. It's a pattern. So international humanitarian law requires all parties to a conflict to avoid locating to the maximum extent feasible military objectives within or near densely populated areas. Other obligations to protect civilians from the effects of attacks include removing civilians from the vicinity of a military objectives and giving effective warning of attacks that may affect the civilian population. The mother of a 50-year-old man killed in a rocket attack on June 10th in a village south of Mykolaiv told Amnesty International that the military were staying in a house next to our home, and my son often took food to the soldiers. I begged him several times to stay away from them because I was afraid for his safety. Sure enough, that afternoon when the strike happened, my son was in the courtyard of our home, and I was in the house. He was killed on the spot. His body was ripped to shreds. Our home was partially destroyed. Amnesty International and researchers found military equipment and uniforms at the house. So that's the kind of stuff they're doing. And it didn't make news, but I wanted to remind people that, and it's on both sides. I'm not saying Russia doesn't commit war crimes too. They're using cluster bombs.
There's no way to invade somebody else's sovereign country, as we learned over the last 20 years, and not kill civilians that are innocent, and mass kill them. That's why it's a bad thing to do.
Why it's a bad thing to do. Yeah. Mikola, who lives in a tower block in a neighborhood of Lysychansk in the Donbass that was repeatedly struck by Russian attacks, which killed at least one older man, told Amnesty International that I don't understand why our military is firing from the cities, and not from the field. Another resident, a 50-year-old man, said, there is definitely military activity in the neighborhood. When there is outgoing fire, we hear incoming fire afterwards. Amnesty International researchers witnessed soldiers using a residential building some 20 meters from the entrance of the underground shelter used by residents where the older man was killed. So that's the kind of stuff you're not supposed to do, and they're doing it. Now, at the end, I'll get to they're using hospitals as de facto military bases in 5 locations. In 2 towns, dozens of soldiers were resting, milling about, and eating meals in hospitals. In another town, soldiers were firing from near the hospital. Russian airstrike on April 28th injured 2 employees at a medical laboratory. Why would they be bombing a medical laboratory, the Russians? Well, Ukrainian forces has set up a base in the medical laboratory. Using hospitals for military purposes is a clear violation of international and humanitarian law. So that's what the kind of stuff's been going on. The Ukrainian military has routinely set up bases in schools and towns and villages in Donbass. Routinely. It's a broad pattern. So these aren't one-offs.
So the kind of stuff we condemned Hamas for a lot?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we condemn Hamas for. That's right. Now, the Ukrainian military's practice of locating military objectives within populated areas does not in any way justify indiscriminate Russian attacks, and it doesn't. And they've been doing that with cluster bombs. All parties to a conflict must at all times distinguish between military objectives and civilian objects and take all feasible precautions, including in choice of weapons, to minimize civilian harm. Indiscriminate attacks which kill or injure civilians or damage civilian objects are war crimes. The Ukrainian government should immediately ensure that it locates its forces away from populated areas or should evacuate civilians from areas where the military is operating. Military should never use hospitals to engage in warfare and should only use schools or civilian homes as a last resort when there are no viable alternatives.
Well, was there a viable alternative to get more money out of us than creating casualties that,
So I just want people to know. So now you can, it's so weird. It's so culty. Like, so if you don't agree with the government and the corporate media about a war, you're like out of the cult. You're like, oh, bad thought. It's all thought crimes.
Well, none of them know. Again, the people that say this, most of them don't even watch the official state media.
I know.
They have a friend they look up to, or like you were talking about looking up to Jon Stewart or whatever.
They see headlines on Facebook.
Yeah, it trickles. The same way a QAnon ant gets her news is how they get their news.
It's BlueAnon.
Yeah.
Go to jimmydore.com to see my new stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny. For only $10, you get to become a premium member, too. And come see us do our live shows. We're going to be doing stand-up comedy in Milwaukee, Nashville, Honolulu, Los Angeles, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, New York, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Baltimore, Maryland, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.